In Connecticut, we age well, we age well, we all can. In Connecticut, we age well in every town across the lifespan.
Welcome to the Age Well Academy, celebrating that our communities are stronger when we all belong. The Age Well Academy is produced by the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative, a statewide, cross-sector initiative that fosters communities where we all thrive as we grow up and grow older. Learn more about aging, dementia, and disability-inclusive communities at ctagewellcollaborative.org. The Age Well Academy is an initiative of
Connecticut Community Care, providing care management and transitional support services and helping people thrive at home with active and meaningful connections to their communities.
In addition to Connecticut Community Care, the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative is also generously supported by
the Point 32 Health Foundation, working to support, advocate, and advance healthier lives for everyone.
The State Department of Aging and Disability Services, maximizing opportunities for the independence and well-being of people with disabilities and older adults in Connecticut.
We're here today to talk about advancing age and ability-based equity. Local governments can promote policies and systems that help all of us have a fair chance to reach optimal well-being. We'll look at the impacts of ageism and ableism, how we got here, and how we can reframe our stories. We'll share practical guidance on what your community can do to promote a deeper sense of belonging for all of us across the lifespan. And we'll celebrate the world premiere of our musical theme, We Age Well. Get ready for an inspired session with thought leaders from across the state. Welcome to our first event in the 2023 Age Well Academy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our conversation today. My name is Alyssa Norwood, and I'm director of the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative. Today's event is being recorded and will be shared with all of you. Please use the chat to ask questions at any time. So before we invite our really talented lineup of speakers to begin, I just want to raise the question that you see on your screen. And in a conversation about age and ability-based equity, the question is, why municipal government? Why is this so important? And why is this a conversation that includes but goes beyond social services in senior centers? Why is this important for those of us who work in planning and zoning, in housing, in transportation, in public safety and economic development, racial justice, information technology, and really every aspect of municipal operations? And I want to submit to you three possible reasons, and I'll frame them as power, prosperity, and people. So let's begin with power. And aging and ability intersect with every aspect of community life. And for those of you who joined us in November, you'll recognize our framework on the left. And it's broad, and I'll submit to you through this lens of power that Connecticut cities and towns are uniquely positioned to apply a lifespan lens in every aspect of a community's work. So we all can ask, what does it look like for local leadership to embrace holistic conversations about aging and ability, ones that recognize that residents who attend senior center programming also need diverse and affordable and accessible housing choices, that participating in health and wellness programs require efficient transportation or remote technology to be able to engage, that community design is fundamental to whether we can successfully remain in our homes and communities as our minds and bodies change over time. So I want to celebrate municipalities, excuse me, as influencers who have the power to effectuate change. Let's talk about prosperity next. So many of you are already deeply engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion work across many different identities. So broadening that view and adding age and ability-based equity to that list only deepens that existing work. And we all know it's important for its own sake, but there are many benefits. You can see some of them listed here. But just to illustrate one point, the last bullet, which is improve health and economic growth, let's hear not all of, but a brief piece of this video about a 3-year study called Soul of the Community.
It's been 3 years in the making, with the thoughts and opinions of more than 40,000 people. Conducted by Gallup, the most respected polling organization in the world, and in collaboration with the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. All with one single purpose: to understand what makes people love where they live and why it matters. This is the Soul of the Community.
The Soul of the Community is a project that we undertook with the Gallup organization to see if you could discover what attaches people to the place that they live. We learned a number of things that were really very, very surprising. And those drivers of attachment were consistent across these 26 communities.
There were 3 major drivers that are most important to creating an emotional bond between a person and their community.
So the 3 things that drive attachment are social offerings, aesthetics, and the final one was openness, and often that's the lead driver of attachment. And so what we were able to see is that if people were more attached to the community that they lived in, that they would engage and help make it a better place.
So unfortunately, we don't have time to listen to the whole thing. You're welcome to on your own. You can see the link there. But the punchline is that openness and inclusivity are incredibly important to residents' emotional connection to communities. And what's more in this study is that communities where residents had the deepest attachment to where they live also had the highest rates of economic growth. So promoting equity for all ages and abilities is incredibly important to towns. And lastly, we talked about these 3 Ps. The last one is personal. So I just want to name that we're all here today as professionals, but this is very much our shared journey. Our minds and bodies are all changing, and that's inevitable. But a lot of our fear and our suffering around it all isn't. So how do we personally, interpersonally, and systematically in all sectors and at all levels of government both celebrate and transcend age and ability? So it's my great pleasure now to help us ground ourselves further in this heart space to introduce Jeff McQuillan. Jeff has been performing around the globe for children for more than 4 decades as a musician, storyteller, and dancer. He works in schools, universities, musicians, libraries, and more. And wherever you see Jeff, you can bet that he'll be moving to the rhythm that drives his spirit and keeps him forever young at heart. So when the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative began its work last year, we asked ourselves a lot of questions, but one was, what does it look like to sing more about aging, dementia, and disability inclusivity? The result was our musical theme, We Age Well, and we're so lucky that among Jeff's many talents, he's also a composer. So at the start of the webinar, our bumpy start, thanks for embracing our technological glitches, you heard the chorus, the lyrics of which are on the screen now. And the song is going to make its full premiere at the end of today's Age Well Academy event. The melody, instrumentation, and lyrics of We Age Well all seek to capture the spirit of celebration and vibrancy that we hope to inspire in communities across Connecticut. So as I said, we'll listen later, but now I'm thrilled to have Jeff McQuillan here with us today for a conversation. Jeff, what a total privilege to have you here. I'm so delighted, especially knowing that you're in the midst of your school day. You just finished one class, you're about to commute to another school for the next class. So thank you for the gift of your presence.
And I'm happy to be here. Very happy.
Thank you. So Jeff, I remember you calling me when you were doing a recording of this song, and you were trying to figure out how to sing the lyric "Complete Streets," which you and others know is this really wonky phrase that's all about making sure that our streets honor people, not just who are driving their cars, but who are walking, biking, etc. So just with that story, how is this project different from other work that you've done?
Okay, and just so you know, I had to look that up. I say, what complete streets? Okay, let me really know what this is about. And it's very different. It was a very different project for me and very rewarding um, through the many months that we worked together, Alyssa. So normally as a songwriter, I will sit by myself, maybe at a coffee shop, somewhere, uh, you know, thinking about what I want to say next. What's the next thing I want to talk about? Some things are just like right there. It's like, I gotta say this. I've worked in collaboration with other songwriters, and that's another thing altogether. But it was very exciting. You gave me possibilities, and then I kind of went with it at first. And I'm like kind of going off in my own direction, And then you presented, well, what about these words? And I said, okay, let me embrace these words, which I think I did. And it was very challenging to kind of come from a different place. So not my own creative pathway, but to take something from someone else, and not just you, but from your comrades, and say, oh wow, I'm with the community now. Just as the song says, I'm with the community writing this song. So it's not just me writing the song; it's more than me. And I quickly realized that. And
yeah, no, we're all part of a community. And you've shared, I'm remembering earlier lyrics were very much about the individual experience of aging, and the song in the end is really emphasizing systems change, right? Because that's the heart of how transformation happens. So thank you for embracing that shift. You've also shared that this song through this process has become very special to you. Can you tell us more about that?
yeah, well, I'm writing the song, and I'm, reading these words and feeling these words and understanding the language. I said, wait a minute, this is my song. This is my song, because it's about, it's about me. I realize it's about all of us, but I was thinking very personal, this song is about my life, as an aging person in Connecticut. And so as I was singing it, it was powerful. Every time I was singing something, it really had so much meaning for me. And yeah, so I took it personally.
Yeah. Jeff, this song, it's not just very special to you, it's become very special to me too. And there's one line in it. I love the line. It's from the bridge. It says, visioning the future, we listen and we learn. I love that listen comes before learn. What's something that you've learned from this process?
Well, I've learned that there's a lot of people thinking about the language, of changing the language of how we talk about aging, and how important the words are. When I'm writing, my words are always important. I'm like, I don't want to repeat myself. I want this to flow. I'm really conscious of words. And here it was, taking these words that have so much meaning for aging people. And so so that was one of the lessons, so many, one of the things I was thinking about.
Yeah. Jeff, my last question for you is, because I know you have to get in your car and drive to your next class. What's one thing that you want community leaders in Connecticut to take away from listening to We Age Well?
Yeah, so I think that this is a work in progress. The song paints a beautiful picture of how we could be and how we will be if we work together as communities throughout Connecticut to implement things that need to happen to make our lives better.
Jeff, thank you so much again. And we're looking forward to hearing you sing and play the full version of We Age Well at the end of today's webinar.
Okay, don't forget to dance.
Absolutely. It's a very danceable song. So thank you so much again for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And drive safely.
I will. I will.
All right. So it's my great pleasure as I reshare my screen. Can you all see it? Yes, thumbs up. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Not yet, Lisa.
That's a yes? Okay. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Monique Lorenzo and Aisha Clark. Monique is an Afro-American Latina change agent and advocate leading the National Center for National Conference for Community and Justice as president and CEO. Social justice is at the core of her work, advocating for equity, human rights, and access to create safe, diverse, and inclusive communities. Monique has an MS in urban policy analysis and management from Milano, the New York School for Management and Urban Policy, and a BS in political science and legal studies from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Aisha Clark, a native and current resident of Hartford, Connecticut, has built a career centered on elevating the voices of those often left out around the city of Hartford. Holding master's degrees in social work with a policy practice concentration from UConn and public health at Benedict University, Aisha leads Health Equity Solutions as its interim executive director. And it's now my great pleasure to turn things over to Monique.
Thank you, Alyssa. All right, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for the National Conference for Community and Justice to be here today with CT Age Well Collaborative. I know I recently met Alyssa a couple of weeks back, but we instantaneously realized that there was mission alignment with our work. And today we are here to focus really on age and ability-based equity. Before I get into a little bit about NCCJ, I want everyone to take an opportunity and in the chat room, if you can please put down what are 1 or 2 words that you associate with the word aging. And in addition to that, what about the word disability? And as you're writing your comments, please make sure to differentiate the two. And we'll give you an opportunity to do that for a moment. Okay. So with that said, I'll share with you a little bit about the National Conference for Community and Justice. We were established in 1927 as a human relations organization. We recently moved to Middletown, Connecticut in September, and we serve Connecticut, Western Massachusetts, and beyond. Our mission is really to advance equality, equity, promote justice, and build inclusive communities. And the way that we go about doing that is focusing on 9 social identities. Today, we're going to tackle 2 of them, which is age and ability, but we also have other identities such as body size, class, gender, race, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. And we realize that all of these identities are socially constructed, and it's our opportunity to work both with youth and adults to help them navigate those conversations. NCCJ serves as a DEI Anchor Institute, a community convener to end bigotry and address injustices and indignities in our country. We have a tagline that goes such as NCCJ, we help humans human better, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with Alyssa and the team to talk about these courageous conversations. And I'll pause there.
Monique, thank you. Thank you for the great work that NCCJ does. And thank you to everyone who's participating in the chat. I hope that you're following it, not just by contributing, but also reading. And, you know, it's interesting. The words are flying fast and furious. So I'm just trying to integrate and synthesize for everyone. But embedded in some of these answers is the reality that as a society, we've arrived at the glorification of youth, of able-mindedness, of physical vigor, productivity, efficiency, right? These are all values that are showing up in some of these words, and yet some of the other responses also recognize the value of presence, of resilience. I've seen accumulated wisdom. The word wisdom has appeared for sure. Spirituality. There's a slowing down sometimes that can enable us to access deeper levels of subtlety and perception. So please keep the conversation going. And we went right to it. But Monique, I'm wondering if maybe we could start at the beginning and talk a little bit more directly about what ageism and ableism are.
Definitely. Thank you, Alyssa. So we can go a little deeper into this conversation, and I will share that both ageism and ableism is about the stereotypes and discrimination and prejudice directed towards people based on age or ability. At NCCJ, we use the term ableism as temporarily abled people, and disability encompassing more than just the physical, right? Those are the things that people can see. There's also the invisible, which includes the neurodivergence, learning challenges, and in addition to that, vision and hearing and mental health. So we want to make sure that when we're having this conversation, that we're just not just thinking about the things that we're able to see. And keeping in mind also that at any point in time, anybody that is able can become disabled due to life circumstances. You hurt your foot, you fall down, you have a baby, you're in the hospital. So keeping in mind, again, that we are fortunate and where we are now. In reference to ageism, that again is the discrimination based on an age group, and that was coined by Robert Neal Butler in 1969. And one of the three elements that he talked about is ageism as it pertains to older people, old age, and the aging process. And obviously for young people as well, they deal with that, and for them it's called adultism in that capacity. There's three different aspects of these topics that we should take into account. Institutional, so keeping in mind for things like ageism, there's retirement, we have when we can vote, when we can join the military, when we can drink, when we can drive. The interpersonal, when folks are thinking about, when people says to you, so how old are you? And they're like, oh, you look really good for your age in that capacity. And then of course, internalized. And some folks may deal with internalized depression and thinking about that some way or somehow that either age or ability diminishes them when in fact it doesn't. And last, we're going to hear from the City of Boston's Age Strong public awareness campaign.
I've been called many things.
Little old lady.
Grumpy old man. Weak.
But you didn't think that, right?
I'm the life of everybody.
I start trends.
I'm an activist. I am in my prime.
I'm aging strong.
This is my Bingo Tuesday.
This is my senior moment in the city of Boston.
Monique, I love that video every time I see it. And we'll be talking more soon about how we can all disrupt ageism and ableism, but this is a nuanced conversation. So one point that I want to make is that we're talking about ageism and ableism together here because there is a relationship, but it's also worth emphasizing that these ideas are distinct and they're too often conflated. And even in this amazing video that we just saw, the man who said, "This is my Bingo Tuesday." So his response to his ageist experience was boxing, right? He was showing his ability. That was his justification for being, look at what I can do. So often the response to ageism actually can end up being ableism, this idea that we're valuable because of our abilities alone. So there are clearly lots of layers to this. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the history of what got us here.
Thank you, Alyssa. So in reference to some of the history, I'll give you all a breakdown of how we got here today. And what you have here in front of you is from Dr. Tracy Gedron, who's an academic gerontologist, author who wrote a book called Ageism Unmasked, Exploring Age Bias and How to End It. And in this book, Dr. Gedron offers us some thought-provoking explanations. And in a nutshell, what she's really talking about is about how do we build an inclusive approach and how we as a community, as partners, as everyone that's on this webinar today, can create a new reality on what it is elderhood and making sure that we're all on the same page. Some takeaways from that come from the rise of the Industrial Revolution, which is associated with urbanization. And as a result of that, a lot of extended families structures suffered and their perceptions of caregiving shifted. And all of a sudden, somewhere along the way, caregiving became a burden. And as a result of that, the caregiving industry became professional, and that is some resources that people use. In addition to that, the shifting of the retirement in reference to life staging definitions for people, rather than who they're becoming. And sometimes when folks retire, they're celebrating everything they did and forgetting everything that they want to do, and that life goes on in that process. So in a nutshell, what she comes back to is embracing aging as a universal and lifelong process. And over time, that includes biologically, physiologically, and socially and spiritually. Thank you so much, Alyssa.
Thank you. It's for those of you who haven't read Ageism Unmasked, it's a wonderful book. It came out just last year, and it really struck me, this idea of what an anti-aging culture we've become, and that aging has somehow become a biomedically based problem or illness rather than simply just biosocial change over time, psychosocial change over time. So it's really helpful to understand this history. And it's also important to note that there are huge inequities. Monique, you were talking about retirement as a life stage, but that's not universally accessible to everyone. So I'd like to welcome you, Aisha, to the conversation. And Aisha, as we talk about inequity in retirement, I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about equity generally.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me here today. And before I answer the question, I just wanted to share a little bit about Health Equity Solutions, also known as HES. We're a statewide nonprofit organization that's dedicated to advancing policies, initiatives, and practices that ensure equitable healthcare access, delivery, and results for all Connecticut residents. And so with that, our conversation today begins with making sure we're all using shared language. It's very important that shared language is a part of our everyday speaking. Many of you know that equality, is different from equity. Equality is when everyone gets the same thing, regardless of whether it's needed or if it's right for them. Equity is when everyone gets what they need with the understanding of various circumstances and conditions. As you take a look at the picture that's in front of you, the newly developed graphic from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, it shows 4 pedestrians of various races, genders, ages, and abilities attempting to cross an intersection. The addition of the curb cut and the accessible pedestrian signals illustrate the point that we can address structural ageism and ableism, and we can create better communities for everyone. We also know that advancing age and ability-based equity can help towns work on diversity, equity, and inclusion across other identities, like race.
So Aisha, as we all do our work with limited capacity, I really appreciate your naming the intersectionality of age, ability, width, race, and other identities. Can you share more on the broader impacts and the importance of this work?
Absolutely. There are many inequities associated with ageism and ableism, and it's widespread and precocious, with impacts ranging from the lack of work, opportunities, to poor quality of life and well-being, marginalized communities. One landmark study found that internalized ageism can actually shorten longevity by a lot, as you can see. Among research participants that were followed for 2 decades, the median survival was 7.5 years longer than those with the most positive beliefs about aging, compared to those with the most negative attitudes. That's really perception, how individuals feel about themselves. And it's beyond the influence of gender, race, socioeconomic status, age, loneliness, and even health.
Aisha, when I first encountered this study and this statistic, it's shocking, right? We all hope that the work that we do matters, but if there is any doubt, what you're saying is this really is a matter of life and death, that there's a 7.5-year difference in longevity just based on our internalization of how we perceive aging, and that's powerful. Aisha, Monique and I were talking before about ageism and ableism, and for many of us, I think the fear about aging is not about aging in and of itself, but it's rooted in how our minds and our bodies change as we move through life. And of course, the thing is, and Monique talked about this earlier, that change in ability can happen at any age. And what's more, that aging isn't inevitably about the loss of ability. So I'm wondering if you could help us unpack that just a little bit more.
Absolutely. I'm smiling because as I'm getting older, I just think about different things, and it's not just a lack of ability. I think the best place to begin is with the data and the stories we choose to tell with it. For example, over 10% of Connecticut residents, which are aged 65 and older, are living with Alzheimer's disease. And nearly 70% of Americans aged 65 and older need or will need some kind of long-term services. Either it's at home, at community center, at an institution. But as the population increases, so does a number of individuals who need services, long-term services and supports. And so there's real work that needs to be done to strengthen the policies and enhance system capacity to provide those supports. There's other part of the story. If just over 10% of Americans age 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's, that means that nearly 90% are not. And if there are nearly 70% of Americans age 65 and older who will need some kind of long-term assistance, nearly 30% will never need long-term care assistance. So that's something we really need to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting. The stories that we tell with data, as the slide says. So, in other words, institutionalization and dementia and other common associations or fears associated with aging, not only are they not inevitable, in some cases, they're not even probable. So, I appreciate you lifting up and naming the importance of planning for a drastically altered landscape and making sure we have robust services to support us all as we change. But in the end, there are a lot of us that are going to continue living life without needing long-term care and without ever developing any sort of cognitive changes. So what about life satisfaction? What does the data say there?
Well, we know that the study of age and life satisfaction, it's known that accident victims who have become paraplegic or quadriplegic are reported more everyday happiness from life's everyday pleasures. And that's other than like those who win the lottery, right? And so other studies have found that support for, as you see here on this slide, a U-shape of happiness across the lifespan, suggesting that happiness becomes high for people in their 20s. It can decrease midlife and then rises again into old age. These studies oversimplify the nuance and individual variability around what it is to be happy and who defines that. It's such a subjective thing. And again, having a disability isn't always positive for everyone. But at the point, our joy, our value can transcend age and ability.
I love that, Aisha. Our joy and our value, they absolutely transcend age and ability. I also know that you're co-chair of Connecticut's Commission on Racial Equity in Public Health, which last legislative session declared racism as a public health crisis. What about ageism and ableism?
A great question. It's really important to know that this is an issue as well. Ageism and ableism doesn't just shorten life expectancy. They're also associated with cardiovascular events. It's also associated with physical function, psychiatric illnesses, and collectively age and ability-based discrimination, negative stereotypes, and even negative self-perception may lead to as much as about $63 billion in excessive annual health spending. The World Health Organization recently launched a global campaign against ageism, whose principles can help address ableism as well. While the Americans and Disabilities Act, Age Discrimination and Employment Act, and other federal, state, and local laws and policies provide some highly imperfect protection and recourse for victims of ageism and ableism, they fall short of creating a culture of inclusion and belonging for everyone. So although we declared racism a public health crisis, it's important to understand that this is an issue as well. It's here the local government has tremendous opportunity to really do some work.
Aisha, Monique, thank you so much for your insights and all of your work to create a more just and equitable Connecticut. Really grateful that you were here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Jeff McQuillan began our conversation about how we communicate. And it's now my total delight to have Deborah McNaught continue it. Deb, as it happens, is also highly musical, but she's here today in her capacity as an expert in how to communicate about age and ability in a thoughtful and affirming way. Deb is a clinical research associate at the UConn Center on Aging, where she helps evaluate and provide quality management to many of Connecticut's long-term services and supports rebalancing initiatives. And for those who aren't familiar with the phrase rebalancing, it's a phrase that talks about creating opportunities to realize the desire of most people to receive long-term services and supports in their homes and their communities rather than in institutions. She's also a trained Reframing initiative facilitator and a former senior policy analyst for Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging. Deb, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Alyssa. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for hosting. So this isn't the socially dominant narrative, but aging and disability can bring new opportunities and capacities for growth, contribution, and self-expression, not how we always look at things. So how we communicate can elevate these positive aspects and disrupt the cultural norm of aging or changes of ability as something to fight. So where do we start? First, and I want to thank Claire for sharing in the chat the APA guidelines. Please look there. There is actually APA guidelines around this. So thank you, Claire, for putting that up. Using the right words isn't about an evolving sense of political correctness. Research shows that words really do matter. In the realms of aging, disability, and dementia, the wrong words can evoke images of frailty, dependency, uselessness, burden, and an accurate or at best highly incomplete picture. So I want to review this slide in some terms to avoid and terms to advance. First, we want terms to avoid. We want to avoid seniors, senior citizens, elderly, aging dependents, anything that has that paternalistic or otherizing statements. Often we hear our seniors, and this is a very paternalistic sounding way of description. I know that this is challenging because this is often what we hear. This is often how things are described, but I really encourage you to really try to avoid that and change the way we're using those terms. So while you keep hearing it and people keep saying these things, I really encourage you to kind of try to change the narrative on that and not use those terms, but instead advance the terms of older people, older adults, and using we, us statements. It's important to mention that in research, it shows the word older person was associated with greater competence than the term senior or senior citizen. So it really does have, it frames those words in a better picture, in a better light. And then and lastly, we want to make sure we're using person-centered language. I'm sure most have heard of this use of language this way, but you want to say a person with dementia, not a demented person, as an example. Always try to using the person-centered language. I also like to give this anecdote. I always try to give this anecdote. During COVID, every single day I would drive by this assisted living facility, and I'm sure they were well-meaning, but they had a big sign up front that said, "We love our seniors." And it just, it just feels so paternalistic to me, and the our seniors framing. Oh, if we could try to get away from that and try to model not using that term. So thank you. So language does matter. It's not just politically correct.
Deb, I really appreciate your emphasis that it's much more about cascading language, right? And it's critically important to promoting the work of inclusivity. And I think a lot of this ties back to some of the fear that we talked about earlier as our minds and bodies change over time, that at least on a subconscious level, this is protective, right? This otherizing is a dissociation. And really we're doing all of ourselves a disservice as opposed to embracing what's inevitable. And for some of us, it might be a really exciting journey. For some of us, there might be challenged. And for most of us, it'll be mixed. So, there's a lot of psychology and emotion packed in subconsciously into the words that we use. So there's a lot of introspection I've found for myself that happens in changing language.
Mhm.
Deb, we mentioned earlier that you're a trained facilitator through the Reframing Aging Initiative. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that work.
Yeah, sure. The Reframing Aging Initiative is a long-term grant-funded social change endeavor that's designed to improve the public understanding of what aging means and the many contributions older people bring to society. The work is now led by the National Center to Reframe Aging and is an initiative of the Gerontological Society of America. Detailed research was led by the Frameworks Institute, led to creation of a guide on communication best practices. So I can summarize some of these terms, how this is applied to reframe disability and dementia. I also encourage you to look on the Frameworks Institute's website and look at their Reframing Aging, the National Center for Reframing Aging's website, and also Frameworks Institute's websites. They have really great information about reframing aging. So first, you want to highlight population diversity. Older adults, individuals living with dementia, people living with one or more disabilities are not all the same. They're not a homogeneous population. So it's important to describe characteristics as specifically as possible to accurately reflect the diversity of this group. So as an example, a municipal survey seeking respondents' ages might have categories of 55 to 64, 65 to 74, 75 to 84, 85 plus, rather than just asking 55 plus. There are many years between 55 and 95. So it's really important to accurately be able to describe this diverse population. Second, emphasize the opportunities associated with aging. Aging is a continuous process of growth and change, not necessarily one of decline and deterioration. Instead of using conflict-oriented words like struggle or battle, advanced aging is a dynamic process with words or phrases like momentum or insights. While still being realistic, the goal is to inspire optimism and generate energy rather than advance fatalism. You want to describe changing demographics positively. Through advances in medicine and public health and the environment and other social determinants of health, we've extended human longevity. So changing demographics to reflect increasing numbers of older adults as a proportion of the population are sometimes described using catastrophic language like silver tsunami or the age wave, instead of advancing affirming language like, while Connecticut residents live longer and healthier lives than ever before. Just that reframing of that catastrophic language. Local elected officials and municipal staff can lead by example and embrace this language dynamic and help begin shifting biased cultural norms around aging, dementia, and disability.
Deb, this is so universally helpful. I know many communities are working on plans of conservation and development, on implementing affordable housing plans and doing survey work across disciplines. And this nuance is so important. So thank you so much for grounding us in these evidence-based best communication practices and for being here today. We're so grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So The work of advancing age and ability-based equity is happening at all levels of government, and it's now my pleasure to have some incredible partners talk about the work happening in state government. So I'll begin by introducing each of our panelists. Claire Cote is a field representative for the Connecticut Department of Aging and Disability Services. Her professional background is in social work, psychology, and gerontology, and she's been working in the field of aging for over 20 years. Walter Glom is Executive Director of the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities, and livable communities are one of the objectives of council activities. And the council recently formed a new community of practice for bridging disability and aging networks in Connecticut. Elizabeth Conklin is a health program supervisor at the Connecticut Department of Public Health, where she leads a statewide coalition on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias to create a state plan using a public health approach. She's been a public health professional for over 20 years. Thank you all so much for being here today. You all are the embodiment of this work as we talk about aging, dementia, and disability inclusivity. So thank you so much. And Walter, when you get the chance, if you could just turn on your camera, we're excited to see you. So I want to have a conversation, and I'm thinking where best to start. So Claire, I guess I'll start with you. Many folks with us today may not know that your agency has undergone a lot of evolution over the past several years. In its most recent organization, the state's unit on aging was consolidated into the former Department of Rehabilitation Services, with the whole agency renamed the Department of Aging and Disability Services. So what's the value in bringing the work on aging and disability together?
Oh, it just makes sense, Alyssa. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. What a great convening so far, Alyssa. So yeah, a lot of people may not know that every state in the country has a state unit on aging, and it tends to be housed in a larger department. I want to say evolution is like the name of the game today. And so we are not we're not foreign to that idea. The state unit on aging is now within the Department of Aging and Disability Services. We've settled here. It's been a few years at this point, and we're quite comfy. We were formerly in the Department of Social Services. We were on our own Department on Aging, but kind of regardless of where we are, we have the same charge. We're charged with putting together the state plan on aging and functioning in a similar way, and always working with a number of community partners, of course. So Connecticut, and I know it's been mentioned, has been talking about rebalancing long-term care services and supports for well over a decade now. And that's all about meeting people's needs wherever they are within the community. And we recognize most people want to stay in the community for as long as they possibly can, as long as it's safe to do so with a good quality of life. And so putting aging and disability together just makes sense to increase everyone's understanding of programs and services that are in place to support people in the community. So if you're looking at somebody's functional needs, then you're not looking at them based off of their age, ability, disability, or their diagnosis. And that goes along with that whole person-centered, not just language, but actual person-centered policies. So that kind of approach really encourages statewide collaboration, communication, which is one of those longstanding goals of rebalancing. And it helps us, but it helps the end user. If you think of every state organization or department as I have a partner who worked in farming when he was growing up. So if you think of a silo, right, and each silo is doing its job of holding grain, corn, something that feeds people. If you think of all of us like that, and we're all well-meaning, we're all outreaching and performing and administering our supports and our services to individuals, that's great that we're all doing our job, right? But if you think of the end user, the Connecticut resident, the resident from another state who's trying to care and support for a Connecticut resident, think of the navigation that has to take place by going to one silo here and another for something else and education over here. Wouldn't it be better for them and for all of us if we we've been saying broken down those silos or connected them more. So we had an understanding and can assist people and guide people as their needs change. It's going to help us as professionals. It's going to help us as residents here in Connecticut. And it's going to take that guesswork out of it and really create what we like to call like that no wrong door approach, where somebody really feels wrapped around. So it makes sense. And Walter, I'm just meeting him today, but my colleagues work with him. I've been working with Elizabeth, Deb. It just makes sense to have us all convene here today. So thank you. Great question.
No, I love this theme of connection and your imagery of the silos. We use that expression, it rolls right off the tongue, but none of us really sort of ground ourselves in the agricultural history and really visualize it. So I appreciate you describing it as you did. Walter, on this theme of connecting silos, you've been involved in some really pioneering work on bridging aging and disability networks. And I'm wondering if you could tell us more about the council's work in this area in particular over the past few months.
Yes, I'd be happy to. But first, I'd like to address a comment in the chat. It won't take long. This issue about language, I agree that language and the language we use is so important. And we've heard this in other places, concerns or even objections to using the word disability categorically in relation to people who are aging. And I totally get that, okay? Unfortunately, those of us in government who run, programs or work to, incite system change for the better, we're saddled with program names and labels that we use because that's how we communicate with policymakers, with the legislators, with the people in DC who write the checks and run these programs. And I just want to say, I totally sympathize with those who see, a problem with some of the language we use. I totally get it. I wish we had a better vocabulary that would be, better for us and would also enable us to communicate what we're trying to do here with the powers in Washington and in Hartford. So I didn't want to run ahead without acknowledging that comment. I totally get it. It is a very difficult topic and it needs to be respected. So having said that, Connecticut is one of 5 states that were selected last year by the US government to form a new national community practice in disability and aging networks. The other 4 states are DC, Florida, Hawaii, New Jersey, and 5 more states will join this year. In Connecticut, this activity is led by the council, my organization, the Department of Developmental Services, the State Unit on Aging, the ARC of Connecticut, AARP Connecticut, and the State Independent Living Council, and Health Equity Solutions, who are here with us today. They're one of our partners in this project. We began back in September with a gathering of state agencies and private nonprofits, where we had a national speaker come in and talk about the history of national efforts to support aging adults with developmental disabilities and their families. And although, along with those 7 charter organizations that I mentioned, at that meeting, we also had the Department of Social Services, the Governor's Office, area agencies on aging, Centers for Independent Living, United Cerebral Palsy, Keep the Promise Coalition, PATH, and many other organizations. The point being that this is about bridging, and that's where we are. We're about bringing people together and having conversations. From that meeting, all the attendees expressed a desire for more frequent opportunities to learn about one another. It was really surprising. It impressed me that we had many bureau chief and director level people, executive directors from the private sector, division directors and bureau chiefs from the state. And we scattered them around and put them at tables with people they didn't know. And I was impressed with how little they knew about one another, and they were too. So there was a desire to do more of this. So since then, the council's been hosting bi-weekly meetings, and this is ongoing. Every other Tuesday at 3 o'clock, we meet remotely via Teams where stakeholders can share information and discuss potential collaborations. So we're learning more about, what disability services look like, both public and private, what's going on with and forgive me, tell me what word to use, the aging community, the elderly community, services for the aging, and I'm not making light of it, but it's difficult for us, to thread that needle with the language. So at each of these meetings, one agency or department shares what they do, and then we have a discussion of where there can be collaboration or overlap with other people. Again, these are ongoing. Our most recent meeting was yesterday. This is open to anyone who's interested in that kind of free-form discussion and sharing. You're welcome to come and be a speaker to that group. So I put my name and my email in the chat. Otherwise, I'm not hard to find. The Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities. We're a state agency, although we're entirely funded by the federal government, so we act independently. But you can find me on the state website, ct.gov, or like I said, my email's in the chat. So if you're interested in participating, reach out to me. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. I want to ask another question of Elizabeth in a moment, but I also want to weigh in on this conversation about language. That's why we're here. So a few points. One, I don't want anyone to walk away from this conversation nervous when they go out into the world, or like, what words do I use? This is a learning curve for all of us, for me too. And, I think it's the humility and sensitivity to recognize that this is an ongoing dialogue and language will continue to evolve. And I think it's more about our awareness than our performance or our perfection. So go out and use whatever words come to mind, but be willingness to have a conversation about it. So to the point of the word disability specifically, we as an organization, the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative, have really grappled around what word to use. There are some people that prefer the phrases differently abled or alternately abled because the phrase dis means not, and it might suggest that disabled is equal to not abled. But in our conversations and our research, other people find the phrases differently abled and alternately abled condescending, offensive, potentially a way of avoiding talking about disability. So at the moment, the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative uses the word disability, but as with all of this language, again, we support any dialogue that advances the disruption of bias toward this idea of normal functioning of body and mind. So we're all in this together. Elizabeth, welcome. This panel is such a celebration of Connecticut successes. And to continue on that theme, I want to share with those who don't know that the Connecticut Department of Public Health was, again, much like Walter's agency, one of 7 grantees nationally to receive funding for an initiative called BOLD, which stands for Building Our Largest Dementia Infrastructure. And I know you and your colleagues have been busily leading a broad coalition to draft a state strategic plan to address Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that work.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for letting DPH be here this morning. I think we're still, or this afternoon, I think it's noon. Thank you also for the presentations up to this point. It's really been interesting and wonderful, and just this whole webinar is really just very comprehensive, and I'm happy to be part of it and representing DPH. And good afternoon to everyone here. So DPH is very proud to have a 2-year grant. We're closing out on the end of our grant, but it was a 2-year grant to convene a statewide coalition really made up of experts in the field of Alzheimer's dementia and Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. We call it the ADRD Coalition for short. ADRD is a term we toss around frequently, but we try to make sure everyone understands what that is. So this core capacity grant was really to convene a coalition of state experts in various fields at local level, state agencies, healthcare providers, college level. We have people that have joined that are people that are experiencing ADRD, their family, caretakers, or the term is care partners is the term that we're using now. And so this panel and group of, it's almost 90 people have been meeting monthly since last February. I joined this specific project in May, so some of the work had been established by my manager, Amy Beasy, who is the director of our chronic disease unit at DPH. And so through monthly meetings, this group has really identified what does Connecticut need to help the aging population. that are facing ADRD or potential in terms of prevention work, secondary efforts, and tertiary. So some of the things that we have talked about include 4 work groups that were developed to kind of look at the key pieces as we draft a state plan. Granted, there's a lot of great minds that came together. Many are here today on this webinar, and I'm truly impressed with all the information that they bring to the table through monthly meetings. They take time out of their workday to join us and draft and come up with, you know, what does Connecticut have? What are our gaps, and where do we want to go? So some key areas that we focused on were statewide coordination of general services as it relates to the ADRD. What is available for early diagnosis and screening and best practices for long-term care? Public awareness and education needs. Is the general population aware of ADRD and who is at risk? Do they know what their risk factors are? Do they know about brain health? And what is our workforce capacity as a state? Do we have enough facilities to help people that may be experiencing ADRD? Do we have enough healthcare professionals, and that's a broad term, that could be physicians, could be community health workers, could be nurses. What is our capacity as a state as we look at the demographics and the number of people reaching a certain age for the state? And then what do we have for people that are taking care of people in their home possibly, or facilities, care partners? What do we have for caregivers? I use that word interchangeably, caregivers, care partners, to support them, because as we know, we are trying to keep people in their home as long as possible, and sometimes that's the best avenue for people with the beginning stages. And it can be very isolating for family members who are caring for someone with this disease. And so those were things that have been brought up to the table, as well as what do we have for data on the rates of ADRD in Connecticut and things that challenge people, and how can we use that data to create policy change, possibly implement other infrastructure needs as we address what are the gaps in our state. So this has been a very intense process. The people that have come to join the coalition meetings and these monthly work group meetings that have been meeting in between really come with passion, insight. I, at DPH, am not an expert in this field. I drive the conversations, and I do, as we talked a lot about in the beginning, listening. I'm really listening to what are the needs, and just we're trying to capture it all. So there are other ongoing themes as we draft this state plan. We're at the stage of drafting it right now, and that is taking everyone's feedback from this work that started in February through November and putting it all into a meaningful state plan that will be looked at, reviewed, fine-tuned with short-term and long-term goals. It will take a long time to create change. As we know, with any state plan, it takes time. We want to make sure there's time for public input. We may need to fine-tune these goals.
Elizabeth, one thing, as you're talking about the goals in the plan, you had mentioned some of them, this focus on healthcare and individual strategies and things based on the medical model. But I think one of the things through my participation in the coalition and the Connecticut Age-Well Collaborative's representation that's really exciting is it's a paradigm shift. It's this wide-ranging embrace of community partners. So I just want to thank you for not just staying steeped in the medical model, but lifting up local governments. The draft plan talks about the importance of police, of local libraries. I think about housing authorities, planning and zoning, and all of the important stakeholders that are necessary to help make Connecticut dementia inclusive. So thank you for your work on that. And Claire, much like the Department of Public Health is increasingly embracing a social determinants of health lens, the State Department of Aging and Disability Services has also been doing amazing work to broaden its vision. Can you talk more about why the department is going beyond promoting really core programs and services like the State Respite Care Program, Congregate Meal Program, et cetera, but also doing this work of promoting cross-sector policies.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, we obviously still promote our programs and services, Alyssa, but we also look more broadly. And so that's why it's actually been my pleasure to be a part of the ADRD coalition with Elizabeth. And so we're looking more broadly at larger goals of long-term supports and services, healthy aging, rights across the lifespan, which all contribute to aging and disability inclusive communities, of course. And this concept has come up a couple of times already this morning. The title of our current state plan on aging is actually Building Bridges and Creating Connections. And if you think of how many of our programs are offered, how they trickle down, they're offered within communities that ultimately bridge the introduction to the state's long-term care services and support. So you mentioned a couple, or congregate meal program that's administered at senior centers and housing sites across the state of Connecticut. You know, you might know your cafe coordinator, the person at your senior center within your local library. And I see some librarians on today and other folks from municipalities. It's exciting to see. If you have that trusted individual and you know that they administer this kind of service, you're going to feel comfortable going to them as your needs change throughout your lifetime. So that's vitally important. So the programming and supportive services through our partners create those community connections that ultimately, because of that connection, increase access and address gaps for everyone that we're working with and trying to work on behalf of. So thinking more broadly about policies, processes that affect like a multitude of people. And I think Deb noted, you know, somebody 55 and 95 could have similar needs, but also dynamically different needs and dynamically different experiences. It really strengthens advocacy and overall access for residents of Connecticut. So if we can work to not only break down or connect those silos I was talking about earlier, it helps to break down the us versus them mentality that comes into play when policymakers have to fund one program versus another. And I know municipalities deal with this. I was part of a municipality for over 10 years where you're looking at that budget and saying, how am I going to slice this piece of pie, basically? Who's going to get the larger piece? But if we can find that commonality, then that's really vital and important. So the breakdown has to continue on much larger fronts. If we can work together to modify our language as a state and change our thinking about age and ability, breaking down these monsters we call ageism and ableism, then aren't we all going to be better off for it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like we need to, and I'm sorry, we need to like humble ourselves. And I mentioned this in the chat, and I know it's difficult for everyone. When Deb McNaught and I were in the Reframing Aging, we were getting trained on this a few years ago. It was kind of mind-boggling, and I've used my my own testimony at the legislature as examples. Like she and I use Silver Tsunami, and we've all done this in our own work. And so listening, that concept of listening and learning is so vital to making sure this happens. And to Elizabeth's, you know, and Walter's comments, like it does take time, but we can do so much if we're all at least trying and being willing to have these conversations and to really ensure that people are feeling valued. Because if you're feeling valued, you're feeling connected, and you're going to be more engaged in your community, whatever that community is.
Right. Our minds act in service to our hearts, right? So it's the work of making sure our heart is in the right place. Claire, thank you. Walter, so much of the amazing work of your organization is about emphasizing self-direction, self-advocacy for people who live with developmental disabilities. So why is the concept of livable communities part of your work? How does that fit in?
Happy to answer that. But first, again, I want to say one more thing about this language thing. Just so people understand, when we talk about developmental disabilities and aging, you know, the population that we're concerned about are individuals who are living with a developmental disability or some significant impairment their entire life, and then they age. So the implication from our angle, so to speak, is not that, gee, people are disabled when they get old. The issue is people have these disabilities their whole life and then they age. And how do you manage all of that? So another discussion for another day. But yes, as far as self-direction goes, the council invests more than half of our grants in self-advocacy, either in training or direct support to self-advocate organizations like People First or Keep the Promise Coalition, and there are others. Livable communities are essential to the promise of self-direction that we have from the Olmsted decision. I hope you're all familiar. Because people need meaningful choices in their communities. If communities are not accessible, then they're not a realistic choice. People need affordable, accessible housing and transportation. Livable communities potentially reduce the load on our social service systems by allowing natural supports and less reliance on disability-specific supports. Programs like Money Follows the Person and Community First Choice all presume that home and community-based services and supports can be provided to individuals. And for those services, people need accessible shopping, healthcare, employment, and recreation. So, in the municipal context, people are looking for those communities where it will be practical and possible for them to, implement their choices and live in the community with whatever, forgive me again, disabilities, that they're living with. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, Elizabeth, and Walter. Thank you all so much. I feel like it's the sign of a good conversation when it feels like we've really only just gotten started, but it's time for us to move on. So hopefully it is the beginning of a continued dialogue. And thank you all, not just for the work that you're doing within your agencies, but as somebody who's been a participant in this policy space for a number of years, it's really heartening to see the extent of cross-agency collaboration, of collaboration across sectors of government. So thank you, Claire, you used the phrase building bridges. We talked about breaking down silos. You're all embodying it. So thank you all for your work and your leadership, and looking forward to hearing more as it unfolds.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So now it's my turn. I'm really excited to share some slides specific on what communities can do. And this is a big topic, and we're going to keep coming back to it throughout the year in our Age Well Academy. So this conversation, when I talk about strategies for community action, is very specific to this idea of language that has really been the core of our conversation today. So I'll begin by sharing that for those of you who joined us in November at our launch event, you know that we released an introductory resource guide, and each of our events is going to be accompanied by a resource guide. It's now live on our website. You'll all receive it after the webinar. It's really the encapsulation and embodiment of everything that we've presented today. So it focuses and looks deeply at this idea of examining the importance of age and ability-based equity. So I hope that you'll use it as a resource, share it if you're here from one particular department in municipal government, that you'll share it across sectors and maybe make this part of a conversation with local elected leadership. So in terms of 5 specific strategies, I'll go through them one at a time, and hopefully they're intuitive, and we'll give you some examples and case studies just as a touch point in the presentation, but in the resource guide, you'll find more detail. So our first piece of guidance, our first recommendation, is around integrating aging, dementia, and disability into your broader diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So we've already talked a lot about how people are people, right? We all have a number of different intersectional identities. So to the extent that we can leverage work that's already happening, whether it's about deeper racial inclusivity, whether it's about religious inclusivity, all of the different identities that we have. So I know many municipalities in Connecticut are considering or have already formalized a statement, a policy, some encapsulation of this idea of trying to address discrimination, affirm the rights of all people, irrespective of, in our case, age or ability, and then recognizing the need for systems change, acknowledging historic and current systemic weaknesses, and advancing vision for the future. For those municipalities that are participating in Sustainable CT, you probably know that Sustainable CT offers an equity toolkit for communities to optimize for equity and also a framework to develop and adopt a statement on equity. So you might consider looking at those resources to think about how you can adapt them not just to your broader equity work, but also consider using them to advance age and ability-based equity. I'll also note that we have 4 more events currently scheduled in our 2023 Age Well Academy. And this thread of equity is going to be woven through all 4 events. You can sign up to attend at ctagewellcollaborative.org. Just click on the Age Well Academy tab, and we hope that we'll see you at future events. So the second recommendation is around having your municipality commit to thoughtful, intentional, and positive representation in language and images. And there's so much to talk about here. So building on the best communications practices that Deb outlined earlier, local governments and all of your stakeholders, we can all work together to review ordinances, policies, websites, really any communications to ensure that the language and images used help advance this narrative of inclusion, of personhood, as well as opportunity. So the resources I want to highlight, and there are many beyond the 2 that I'm going to mention. So one, in collaboration between Shutterstock and the American Society on Aging, there's a website, shutterstock.com/explore/ASA. It's a library of images that really speak to this idea of vibrancy rather than some of the more traditional photographs if you go to various photo libraries around representation of aging. Something else that I just wanted to flag as we think about in communication, the article that's linked here, you might be interested in reading it, from a year ago in the New York Times, is called "The Hidden Image Descriptions Making the Internet Accessible." So those of you who are already familiar with alt text, this won't be new information, but those who haven't given much thought to this, you can see the picture of the Mona Lisa, and just depending on the size of your screen, the little peach boxes might be difficult to see, but they're examples of alt text descriptions of this image from Microsoft Word, from Facebook and Wikipedia. And this is the way that somebody who is blind or has low vision navigates the internet. So somebody that encounters this image, depending on what alt text was or wasn't put there, the computer will make certain determinations, will either describe this as a painting of a person. There's one that says Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, but then a bunch of gobbledygook in the file name, which often happens when we upload files. And then the last is the computer just guessing, and it says maybe an image of one person and a strawberry. So as you create content that goes online, be very thoughtful about what the alt text says from a disability inclusion perspective. Our third recommendation is around educating municipal leaders, staff, and residents through training, community conversations, and local awareness campaigns. So advancing equity begins with training of local elected officials, of staff. You all took a tremendous step forward in being here today to help build a common vocabulary and understanding. And as mentioned earlier, such training can be woven into broader trainings on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another fun strategy is around hosting a forum, a book club, or other community conversations. So in our resource guide, we have a list of a number of different books that you might consider as a substantive springboard for these conversations. And you also might consider implementing a local awareness campaign. So as inspiration, the World Health Organization has released a guide. It's called Initiating a Conversation About Ageism. The principles in it are applicable to other isms as well. And then the last part of this, which is really exciting, is the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative is privileged to have received services through a competitive process, pro bono services through the Yale Social Impact Consulting Club. So the Yale Social Impact Consulting Club is comprised of a number of very dynamic, thoughtful, engaged students at the Yale School of Business who are all volunteering for different organizations statewide. And we have 3 such students that are helping us ask the question, what does it look like for all levels of government and community partners to launch a campaign to promote age and ability-based equity in Connecticut. So if that's a conversation that interests and excites you, if you can sort of imagine and remember the 30-second ad campaign that you saw from Age Strong Boston, what does our version look like? So stay tuned, and we'll follow up, and anyone who wants to be more deeply involved in that conversation, we hope that you'll join us. Our next recommendation is promoting opportunities for connections across generations and ability types. So a key component to overcoming this idea of difference and seeing differently is to be with people that on some outward level or outward manifestation don't look like us, because that's how we're able to cultivate connection and celebrate our humanness. And what's more, that communities that promote such opportunities can foster a greater sense of connection, which, as we know from the video we saw earlier about the soul of the community, is really important to health, to economic vibrancy. So one of many resources that we list in our resource guide is this guide put together by Generations United on sharing our space. And it's a step-by-step toolkit for how to develop and enhance intergenerational shared sites. So in other words, a space that's intentionally designed to provide programs to multiple generations concurrently to foster meaningful cross connections. So it could be a preschool concurrently located with an adult day services facility, by way of one example, and there are many others in both Connecticut and beyond. And finally, the last, and I would submit one of the most important recommendations, is around including community members with lived experience in policymaking. We all know this is important. It's incredibly hard to do. So what ends up happening is we have a lot of initiatives that are community informed, and that's important. We also then have to ask the question, when we talk about community informed, well, who in my community? Is it the person in my community that can easily access a town meeting? Is it the person that feels confident to speak in front of a group of people? Is it some other privilege that confers me the opportunity to be part of that community informed process? Taking the paradigm beyond that to community involved, but ultimately to community driven. So we know this is hard to do. So the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative wants to try to do it, hopefully to create not just opportunity for us to do our work better, but hopefully to create a model for local governments where we can experiment, see what's successful, what isn't, share our challenges, lessons learned, and all do this work together. So many of you know we've opened our application for our Community Leaders Fellowship, which is a paid opportunity for Connecticut community members who are aging, living with dementia, living with a disability, or acting as a care partner of someone who is, into a process of shared learning, trust building, and empowerment to help guide and shape the work of our collaborative. We value everyone, and we're looking for everyone to apply and participate, but we're especially looking to recruit from historically disempowered populations. And long-term, a subset of fellows will be selected to join the collaborative steering committee. So by all means, please help us spread the word. So what's next? Just a few final thoughts to leave you with. The next is that I mentioned we have future Connecticut Age Well Academy events happening, and there's an in-person event happening this April 26th at the state capitol from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's our Sharing and Celebration Summit, where we're going to be awarding our 2023 Wellspring Awards. So nominations are due by this Friday at 5 p.m. Thanks to the many folks who have already applied. If you would like to nominate a project, I highly encourage you to do so that we can recognize and celebrate the great work happening across Connecticut. You can learn more and submit a nomination at the link provided on the screen, as well as in the chat. And then finally, in the way of events, this one is a late addition to our program, but we're delighted with humility. Connecticut is going to welcome Dr. Alexander Kalache, the former director of the World Health Organization's Global Aging Program and the current president of the International Longevity Center at Brazil. He's going to be sharing an international perspective, stories, and calls to action from 15 years in leading this work, and we're so incredibly grateful to one of our primary funders, the Point 32 Health Foundation, for making this opportunity happen. So this is a special late addition to our Age Well Academy, and we hope that you'll register and learn more and participate in what we hope will be a wonderful conversation of international inspiration. So the last thing I'd like to do before we launch into the world premiere of We Age Well is to thank our collective impact partners. So the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative works in a collective impact model. For those who aren't familiar, we define collective impact as a network of organizations, institutions, and community members who are all working to advance equity by learning together, aligning, and integrating to achieve population and systems level change. So we have a number of strategically cultivated partners who are collaborating with the Connecticut Age Well Collaborative to foster more aging, dementia, and disability inclusive communities. And we thank you all for your passion and for your continued partnership. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'd particularly like to thank Jeff McQuillan and the many partners who help actualize our theme song. And with that, we now have the world premiere of We Age Well. Thank you all so much.
Connecticut, we age well, we age well, we all can. In Connecticut, we age well in every town across the lifespan. We all gather wisdom in our open hearts, growing stronger when we all belong. Opportunity in community, including everyone, is where it starts. In Connecticut, we age well, we age well, we all can. In Connecticut, we age well in every town across the lifespan. Got complete streets we can get around, housing choice and public space abound. Join our progress toward equity, deep connection, and inclusivity. Visioning the future, we listen and we learn. Let's go where we grow all life long. When we feel seen, you know we're shining bright. When we honor choice, we know we're living right. Follow all to chart systems change, to make places we can thrive. We'll plan and zone together. Dance here every season is good. It's so good, good to be alive. In Connecticut, we age well, we age well, we all can. In Connecticut, we age well in every town across the lifespan. In Connecticut, we age well, we age well, we all can. In Connecticut, we age well in every town.